Welcome back to Blurred Lens Pictures, and I'm your host again, Brent Noury, and welcome to the channel. Um, we're going to try and finish our reading series of The Flower Maker in this audiobook, and I'd like to jump right into it as to not have too much of an introduction. There's already two long videos in this playlist on the channel, and thank you for joining us. Appreciate that. Um, and this is the novel that I've written, The Flower Maker. And we're going to jump right into chapter 7, The Orphan. Brrr. It was his mother texting him. See you tonight. Looking forward to it. Ava Margot will be coming, she said. This gave him a type of joy you'd only see in a Fred Astaire dance or a person who could suddenly jump higher than ever before. A grandpa taking Charlie's golden ticket. She would be there, and in this time in his life, she was the most important person he wished to build a relationship. His niece, the orphan. It had been uppy and all hugs and smiles when she was a child, though at times he thought she fell too much into the tea party world of pure fantasy and living stuffed animals, as her father might. Her father, though a poet of sorts, could never really tell the truth. It was all exaggerated, a pathological over-embellishment of every story, as if to say his life was more important than it was. And he was not a bad man. He was disturbed. And this was the reason he would say he couldn't keep a job. He had thought about how to tell her all the things that he knew about them. But she wouldn't understand then. She turned 3 days after Jade's death. But she had been asking recently, and she was old enough now at 13. But what could he say in so little time with her? The three of them, mother, niece, and him, would vacation each year in Old Orchard, Maine, near the center of town, along the beach, next to the amusement park. R.A. and Gray had even come up for a day this year, and as the days would go and into the night, he would finally have chances at conversations with Ava Margot, and things like what her new interests were in life, and he would try to impart information of the good kind and listen to things she said. He knew his stepfather would not do this listen. He was known to say things to children like, "What are you, stupid?" and "Stop asking questions." His mother had left his father for a sociopath, an Italian Republican from Revere, Massachusetts, of the management type. He would come to find out years later as his stepfather retired broke in his 50s and allowed his mother to continue working into her late years just to sustain income for the home, that he had acquired his management position by being a scab and crossing picket lines. He was the type. What's good for him always. The artist and his sister had known this almost immediately and had lived in a daze of confusion for quite a while since the ages of 4 and 6, that something was going wrong. Dad was such a good guy, and he was the devil. But over time it set in. We would have to get used to this. A strange feeling in the room always, as though somebody didn't want you there. He had gotten away at 10, telling his mother to her face while sitting in the car in late August that he was going to live with his dad. Those 3 years were a gap in the relationship with his mother and sister. It had been brewing. The time would come when she would have questions, and he hoped she would have questions. He was becoming the type of person who had answers to questions, or, at least, was an expert in asking questions. And so he knew what some of the questions might be, and he had tried to give as much of the cheat sheet as possible to both Ava Margot and Gray. She had been fantastic in theater and chorus for the last few years, but now she had given it up. She had even talked of NYU, but now no more. She didn't like it anymore. She had stolen the show as the stand-in actor for the Scarecrow role in the Wizard of Oz play and never remarked on her talent. Her singing and acting seemed to be the thing she was good at. He couldn't understand how his parents, her guardians, could possibly let her give up such things in favor of soccer or basketball, which she never practiced or cared much for. He thought they were allowing her bad habits for life, and he was always concerned she wouldn't be prepared. End of chapter 7. The Flower Maker by Brent Noury. Chapter 8. In the Mansion. A plane flew overhead, headed for a landing at Manchester, Boston. What were they up to, the people up there in the clouds? Were they on vacation or working? Were they watching a movie or reading? Were they at the best part and now had to put it down for landing? Would they return to the story? He thought of the story he'd been pondering all day. Was it becoming something from these little vignettes? Was his flower growing inside the greenhouse where no one could see, not even himself? What would it look like? And could he even describe such a thing? Would the reader then have to become the viewer and imagine it in their own way? Could the pollen somehow reach their nose through sixth sense? Would they understand what this type of honey would taste like? It would taste like the part of dreams where friends of the past come and visit you, and every time you tasted it, it would always be the same and different. And just like that, he was back in the mansion, thinking on flower petals, inside the beekeeper's mind, wondering why the bees kept dying. The beekeeper would be investigating such a thing. Why was the queen not laying eggs? Why was there a strange, diseased comb? With every batch of bees he would bring, and the previous would die, he wanted to see inside of the greenhouse the thing that was in there. The scientist was pacing the room, speaking to himself in what sounded like Latin. The beekeeper couldn't make it out, and then, for the first time, the lady, once an apparition, appeared in the flesh, coming through the doorway soft as silk. She moved as though there were traces of her everywhere. She nodded at him and spoke to the scientist, but he didn't hear her. He kept about his pacing. She looked towards the beekeeper. He thought to introduce himself. "Is there still no honey?" she said with a slight grin. Then, with a widening smile, she threw her head back and laughed. "His flower is the most beautiful. It's unbelievable." He remembered his name, Stellan. He reached out his hand to greet her. Again, he didn't know her name. What would her name be? The beekeeper already knew her name, as her being of some prominent family and of having some fame from her beauty before the Svengali spell had hid her away. But the artist needed her to have a good name. One for all times, like Murasaki and the Tale of Genji. One where in 1,000 years, if his name had been lost to time, The author may be named after a character in the book, but Murasaki meant lavender, and that was the name of flower, not the flower from his story, but the other from his past. Panda, also known as Lavender, had changed her name to Flower, and he wondered if he could use her again. They were all connected, anyways. Maybe naming her a flower was a bit too on the nose, but it may attract the beekeeper, if he wasn't already, which assuredly he was. He waited in suspense for her reply, feeling his heart starting to pound as slow motion set in, a universe swirling in her eyes. I'm Maris, she replied. There's an irony to walking on the moon. It's that we could be doing it here, jumping around, a ballet in your own mind, or the universe's greatest drama with everything known at stake. She could be all of them, the lovers, whoever you've loved, whoever you've met. That atmosphere suddenly is there, and you could be raptured and destroyed of the usual, and all paradigms shift in her wake. Her eyes could eclipse all others, in a dreamlike trance. No, don't think enough to be awoken. Here I'll stay, you'll say, while Mephistopheles stands grinning, with words but a dunce from your lips in her presence. She should not be thought of fully as a jewel or a trophy, but she is a thing to be won, to be sought, not to be owned, or maybe of some hoping to gather one's own soul. She is all the missing pieces. The entire world and all of its history to the end will be but less than a word spoken through the universe. What an oppressive weight to the thinker. Unless one could use one's soul to be set free for the time being, the body would be but a ticking time bomb until ultimate putrefaction. The soul is a blind person feeling for things to get around. The wires are crossed and painted strange colors such as red, blue, yellow, white, and black. The soul is a blind surgeon searching for the proper nerve, but like a bad doctor, unaware of the dangers to the body, poking and prodding to get some response. Often the response is not fully tethered to the mind. The soul should be a student to its own life, and then a guru to its own student, the thing that emerges every few years to say, I'm not what I once was. That is the spirit trying to escape, but still stuck in the library of one's own epics. For instance, what were the limits of what a flower could look like, especially if inserted into the imagination? The artist thought of a time in his teenage years when he went to a friend's house one evening, and when he entered his friend's room, a science experiment of some sort was already underway, where Dr. Schmela, we'll call him, had placed a large glass jar in the center of the room filled with tap water, and he had a plugged-in, split electrical cord running a current into the water. Then the fuse blew, so Dr. Schmela reset it and continued his experiment until a strange, black, moldy substance started growing inside of the jar. To the two, it was miraculous, and they had invented life on Earth. The artist willing to take some credit, though not his idea, but he had endured the experiment and survived, and so he was a bit of a Tenzing Norgay, a Sherpa carrying gear to the summit. And that friend was still an artist too, somewhere in the Midwest, Wyoming or Nebraska or some place like that. places that people go from your past that aren't still hanging around if you are. And if you are, you're doomed to watch it all fall apart from what it once was, or internally pressured to save the day, to speak out or sit idly by, waiting for the dust that will never settle. Lives aren't long enough for the threads to come back together. But in the unwinding of strings, the artist found solace. He had been confused by his affliction of contemplation, a need for a moment's peace to recollect, to reflect on a day's thinking on one's ideas. And he would find himself hypnotized by his collecting shells from the tide. He would sink his feet in the sand as the waves came again and again, as a standing sandcastle waiting to fade into the depths, and the star would rise and set in bliss with ease, with his eyes beset of rocky shores and stormy seas. The mad scientist had to be on to something, though, with his inventive imagination. And the beekeeper must be a bit mad, too. He would go home to his own comb of honey snacks and think on the damsel. Honey nut oats and honey in his tea. The artist thought of his stepfather's Italian traditional honey pretzels around Thanksgiving and Christmas. And maybe those were the only things his stepfather ever truly learned from his sweet Italian mother, who put a million times more love into her cooking. He could never understand why his baked goods didn't come out as good as mother's recipe. In time spent at his parents' place, the artist had witnessed some of the daily cooking habits of his stepfather. Typhoid Jim, he called him. Guaranteed diarrhea. Things left on counters to be added later after a good bowel movement, and unwashed hands going directly onto food surface. It will all get cooked in the oven, his mother would defend. Yes, the feces will be cooked into the cookies, he'd say. Bread, butter, and honey. Some people didn't even know about it. They preferred cinnamon toast or something, which was also a good cheap snack. He thought about how he could give the beekeeper a snack from his childhood to munch on as he pondered the fair Maris. Meeting her had seemed almost less real than seeing her through the window. The thought of her put him on a bed of clouds. The bees were of little concern. She was a light and he a simple moth, simple enough to have wings. His heart had fluttered as though connected to wings. Was he like a bee? And she a hidden queen, needing to be saved from a diseased hive? Oh, yes, the hive, and why they're all dying. The tests were inconclusive, and maybe setting the bees free was the only answer. But they'd been in contact with this strange flower, and what if they unleashed some carnage on nature? Would he be diabolical? Chaos could ensue of his own doing, and it could be the fault of the things he loved the most. End of chapter 8 of The Flower Maker. Thanks everyone for showing up in the chat. Just wanted to say hi real quick to everyone. We're doing the final reading right now. I gotta get. Sorry if this is in the background, sound of my car, but I gotta charge my battery. I'm gonna have a little sip of my. If you got something going, have a little honey whiskey or honey in your tea. We're doing the flower maker here and finishing it up. We still got a good ways to go. I think I can do it. Luigi, thanks for showing up. Good name, brother. Adianta Tandon. I'm from the United States. I'm from New Hampshire. I'm from the same town as Adam Sandler, if you've heard of him. He's pretty famous. Thanks y'all for showing up. Again, this is the Flower Maker. I don't want to pause for too long. We're just moving along with the reading. The first 2 episodes of this can be found on my channel under the Flower Maker playlist. There's a journal of me writing it, and there's also one that's just a straight up audiobook. Song that's currently stuck in my head. Anybody got that? A song, get some conversations going in the chat. Anyways, the Flower Maker is sort of about your own imagination and kind of trying to dig as deep as we can get. We got a little bit of light left, so I want to try and read as fast as we can. Thanks for everyone showing up again. This is Birdlands Pictures. I'm Brent Noury. This is the Flower Maker audiobook, and we're up to chapter 9. Inside the book. The idea suddenly struck the artist. He knew exactly what the mad scientist was up to, and it was shocking to even himself. And he couldn't let the beekeeper know yet, nor I let you. The flower was extraordinary, maybe an infinite being. He was seeing himself inside the beekeeper and flower maker's minds, moving them wonderfully across the labyrinth of his mindscape. Blocks of platonic shapes were fitting their known notches. The beekeeper would have to find something in the doctor's paperwork to solve the flower riddle. Something about all of space and time and matter. The artist had the chill again when something he was working on seemed in some way not to be his anymore, but alive, in its own thing that grows. And there was a gust of wind at the same moment, and he was afraid the idea would escape him. The flower maker would have to make a speech from his essay. Sorry, folks. The flower maker would have to make a speech from his essay on the unnatural. This is when the artist really discovered that his past work was taking hold of his future, and he was sort of along for the ride. He had discovered something about himself in the search for the scientist's secret flower. Something he knew from the beginning. Something in the papers and the design of a novel. Adding his old pieces to it, in the words of his characters, making it difficult enough for those who demand it. But he was an idealist or a romantic, a realist, surrealist. He could see the flickering tiptoe light casting its dance on all the objects. He could see the mystery of the greenhouse and the thing within. The artist knew it now, and I promised to keep it a secret along with him. I can only tell you, and you'll have to believe me when I tell you, that the flower was the most gorgeous thing you could ever imagine. And I suppose I could tell you that the beekeeper's life was at stake. The artist still felt he had to kill him in the end. He had no idea what was about to hit him. The artist began working on a way to save the beekeeper's life. Was it cliché to get away with the damsel, or was it obvious for the tragic killing inside the mansion? A bit of who's gonna do it? Most obviously the doctor, but maybe the flower, or Maris herself in some psychotic turncoat rage, still under the doctor's spell. He'd have to discover what was in the greenhouse, and it would happen the next time he was called to the mansion. He would walk into the scientist's study and find him there as usual, musing to himself of some absurd thing or other. And this time, the doctor would try to relate some of his work to the beekeeper, in hopes he would understand. He had written an essay on unnatural things and the meaning of such a concept, and the beekeeper would listen to the lecture of a man he now thought mad. All right, end of chapter 9. Thanks for tuning in, folks. We're up to chapter 10 of The Flower Maker, and this is where you would go to the index. Chapter 10, A Madman's Essay. Beep! See index. And you would go to the index for index number 2. Again, the preface of the whole thing would be in the index number 1 as well. Excuse me, this is index number 3. I'm sorry. Index number 2 would be Can It Be Fair? His earlier article. And both of those can be found on Blurred Lens Pictures. I'll put links and everything in here in the description eventually. All right, we're moving on to chapter 11. And this would be after the essay. So again, the reason I put them in the index is you can skip them if you want to. You can skip the preface and start right at the beginning of chapter 1. You can skip his article, if you don't want to read what he's working on or whatever. But the idea is, if you really want to read the book, you can read it a few different ways, is the idea. But the index is not overly done in some sort of contraption like some other maybe postmodernists do. And so we're up to chapter 11 of the Flower Maker, and this is chapter 11, Inside the Book, part 2. The beekeeper exhaled, wondering if the speech was over. Still sort of thinking on the first few lines and how it all worked together in the seeming jumble. Maybe the doctor was onto something and not all mad. But most likely, this event only confirmed the beekeeper's suspicions, and he thought of getting Maris away from this place. He didn't need the flower or the bees, maybe just Maris. And he looked out the window of the study, which faced the courtyard where the greenhouse was, and Stellan saw Maris standing by the greenhouse door. Her image was a bit blurred due to the rain running down the glass in frame. She disappeared into the greenhouse. The artist thought she might have on a flowing floral pattern dress, but the beekeeper had seen her wearing boots, gloves with a shovel, and gardening attire on. He thought that today would be the day he finally sees what's going on in there. He was tired of killing bees and wasting time. What was Dr. Schmela really up to? There was something ugly about it, something he couldn't get past, both the artist and the beekeeper, and maybe the scientist too. It was the idea of perfect and what it could be, maybe not possible, but in the hands of this God. Maris came out of the greenhouse, and Stellan thought she looked as though she was crying. The artist had an idea for the name of the flower. It should be opposite of what one might think, and hence give it some thought and weight. The scientist had just discovered it too. He thought the beekeeper should know the name, both the scientist and the artist. And I think you should know it too, for we might have to take a break from this room and the destiny awaiting in the greenhouse. And so the scientist stood up and declared it profusely. I have it! And glared at the beekeeper, eyelids raised to the ceiling, showing the whites. It shall be called the mundane, or the boredom mundane, and the French shall call it ennui. And the beekeeper sat even more confused. You shall call what? What? I shall call the flower the mundane. It has a certain ring to it. Is that to reference all the things it's made of? Yes, exactly, in a perverse sense of irony. The doctor lifted his chin, nose, and eyes to the ceiling. That the most beautiful thing of all should be called the mundane. How wonderful! It reminds me of Marlin and that snail on a razor. The beekeeper's stomach churned as though an apocalypse was happening inside of him. Was he some sort of Martin Sheen or Dennis Hopper? And the doctor some cult leader dressed in black spouting some harsh truths? Was Maris a Valkyrie leading him to Valhalla? Well, the beekeeper wasn't much of a warrior, more of a geek per se, but had grown into himself as a man and kept in shape with his beekeeping and nature habits. He could surely take the doctor in a fight if need be. The thought ran through his mind. He need no axe to subdue this creature, which is what the doctor was beginning to look like in his mind. End of chapter 11. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Everyone that's still here listening. Putting this away. Gonna start on another one of these. Have one if you got one. I'm gonna set this aside, give you guys a little view of the sky maybe for a second as I open this. Jim Beam, if you want to fund the publication of this novel. Quick little sip. Have a little bit of your anything you got at home. It could be anything. Tea, coffee. Goes good with the book. Or I'm also gonna take part in a little bit of smoke here. Get a little shmee going if you got any. Not if you're a kid. And again, this is supposed to be blocked so that kids can't read. This is for adults. This is adult reading. Oh, I'm sorry. People that left, come on back. All right. This is The Flower Maker. I'm Brent Noury. And this is chapter 12. Impending Doom. Brrr, brrr. How something so simple as a woodpecker to draw my gaze and wonder. What are you looking for? Oh, to be so simple as a critter diving into grains of time through the elms and oaks and pines and maples. Leave not out the white birch in her creeping beauty, whose autumn leaves hang like some designer top. The trees have it figured out, but lie under the bruised thumb of the hammerer. Nail you into some structure ordained by them, the forever them and they, who wield and who worry and who worship. It speaks to them in the park constantly for those who can hear it. It longs to be known through you. You are a daily gift you give yourself, and it's there, always, to be unwrapped and seen and shown, held up as the perfect thing, the most shining, the thing in between all the things and the things. The now, or so it seems. There it is again, and the birds are chirping, keeping guard, and planning attacks for stealing lunches, and the grass was growing ever so slightly. The artist took his mind off the beekeeper for the moment and was back to the 3D world, but only on the surface, as the thought of his art show's creeping premiere set in, a point of doom. There was no turning back, and he'd have to appear at his own making. It will be nothing, and I should enjoy it. For my friends will be coming, people who've already seen what I'm doing. Yes, what I'm doing. I know, but they don't know. But I don't really know a thing. In trying to describe a thing, I only get lost in the other things. And they branch out, or find roots which find depths, and I'm forever pulled into. If I were to write The Flower Maker, The institutions would ignore the thing, and without finance to publish, it would remain obscure, and I'd have to probably self publish and send out to known readers in hopes of sharing the flower. I know the mad scientist is up to something. I've seen inside of his mind, and I'm his creator, after all. He was pitying himself again, he thought. How often would he have an art showing, even if it was old work? R.A. was involved, and Lavender, Panda, now Flower, had always provoked him to have a real showing, and so had others, such as his bandmates A and A, one a classic rock and country guy, and the other a connoisseur of metal. The metalhead was the drummer. The band was known to turn a slow ballad pop song into a punk rock blues experimental epic, a band of gypsies in their own minds. Though they got together and played less and less these days. It could be up to 6 months or a year between sessions, and a drinking night would ensue with a band with no real bass player, a stack of pedals before each guitarist, and the nicknamed Andy the Animal behind them playing a combination Bonham, Moon, Ringo, King Fowley feel to the percussion. And in those spaces of sound notes, the freedom of human spirit engulfed the room for the practicing three. The three never to play anywhere other than there. And R.A. would be in charge of the music tonight, which meant probably 80s one-hit wonders and dance music. Something about that made her an early Nine Inch Nails fan. He had just remembered hearing Head Like a Hole over and over as he rode around getting car sick while his babysitter cousin met up with her weird-haired boyfriend. Why didn't people like the Beatles anymore? He would find would be a reoccurring thought he would have. People hated Give My Regards, but No More Lonely Nights had been his first favorite song during his parents' divorce. And Tutti Frutti seemed also really good. He believed in them, the musicians, who could really show the thing in itself. Dionysian, perhaps, but truthful to something. He was always jealous of people who knew more about music. They could remember everyone's names. But he grew up with CDs, and guitar was a thing he was afraid of. It would consume him, and so would music if he tried to theorize it. The one good thing he could say about his stepfather is that he had a decent taste in music and had kept a decent stereo system. His father had better taste with the Stones and Sabbath and Kiss and New Wave, and his father fancied himself a John Lennon of sorts, combined with the cooler king of the Great Escape, Frank Zappa, or a lost Ramones brother. Concerts had been a special thing his father and sister would do. They had seen Poison and Aerosmith, and she had been a teacher to him of all cool things from the 60s. Well, that, and movies. He constantly watched movies to the point where the real world didn't make sense. He wouldn't learn about international films for years in an obsession binge after Flower. But the American 70s fascinated him to no end. How could he write a screenplay so he could make a classic? How do you describe what the camera is doing on paper? It seems tedious. Eventually, he'd learn that some ideas are meant for a novel. End of chapter 12. Again, folks, we're reading The Flower Maker, taking a quick sip. Thanks for tuning in. All right, The Flower Maker by Brent Noury, Chapter 13, The Road to the Art Show. Psh! A car passed by with all the others. As the artist stalked slowly down the old New England brick sidewalk, looking at its cracks within his own shadow, he was making his way. The Firefly Bistro was 4 blocks up the road from his apartment, and that's where the art show would be held, in its gallery lounge. Flower had worked there, and he had met her there every night when they dated. A perfect martini with the goat cheese olives and a French onion soup and creme brulee while waiting for her shift to end. Then the night out with the tattooed girl, who might be some kind of Satan's mistress. Would she be there tonight, with her girlfriend and boyfriend? He had yet to meet them. He sensed that feeling before a big game where time doesn't really rush into it but hovers in an electric mist. Anticipation, I think they call it. Again, the sickness crept in. He had been leaving the park and saw an old man on a bicycle with a child seat that was empty. Next, passed a 2-year-old boy who instantly went over his handlebars face first into the ground, luckily into the grass. Was it mid-afternoon already? I'd spent so much time in the park. Did I get anything done? Yes, I guess I sketched the flower maker. There's so much to go for the prize in the box and the beekeeper. I guess he still has to die some way. Remember in the old novels when someone would die from shock, and when you first heard of this, you thought it was impossible, and then you lost people suddenly and realized it was. You couldn't imagine yourself going on, and so you wouldn't. There's an alluring nature to that darkness. Your hunger for a longing draws you there. The muse is a deep-sea diver. She hands you a spear to battle Leviathan and Krakens and Cthulhu and whales painted pale. Here's another homeless man and a woman, and they're too old, it seems, to save themselves. And here's another. And here's your younger one of 20s who's lost his shoe. Yes, another lost issue. He had to change the way he wrote in the 6th grade after he had written some love letters to his girlfriend. But they were written in cursive, and so she didn't understand and shared them with the friends in class. Next thing he knew, they were broken up. And he was called a crunchy because he dressed like Kurt Cobain. A cool autumn afternoon breeze enveloped him, and he thought of what's to come, the dark, lonely season, dressed up with lights to give you hope and a savior. With the fights between him and his stepfather, he was not allowed at the house where his mother and sister's daughter lived, so Christmas had become less celebration and more a deep time of reflection for the artist. He would spend his time on things such as Tchaikovsky and his loss of his sister, and his creation of the pas de deux, and the moment of pure bliss in art. He remembered the girl in the comments section of the YouTube video, writing of her dream to play the Sugar Plum Fairy, and how she was so proud of her friend who got to this year. He lifted his head and let the light from the sky enter his eyes, and he peered down the main street in town, Elm Street, and the buildings that lined it on both sides faded into blocks and sketches of shapes, and the people became one mass collective, and the sounds floated in and out of each other. It was just down the road, the art show, but the aching was setting in. He needed the serum. He had kept the thoughts at bay with his flower maker obsession, but his veins trembled for the elixir of the gods. Jesus in his blood. It was a CIA plot, he thought sometimes, to go after the people who feel and make them not feel anymore, and to make them happy in the not feeling, a way to scrub them out. He was afraid it would happen tonight. No, not tonight. Not in front of everyone. Don't let them find me like that. His father had told him he was supposed to be a Kennedy or a Gandhi, but he had died before Trump and Bernie, and he was never really sure which side he would have been on. He'd have to get it before the art show, so not to be completely on edge. But the thought crept in again of his eyes, and he thought of the beekeeper, and how he still had to save him. All of things were pointing to that flower in the greenhouse and the real magic inside. There was destiny in that greenhouse and a yearning for a view at something so perfect. But all the plot lines ended in that room, inside the place where you find the answers, illumination and ecstasy, free of dharma and samsara. He wanted to be a bee in the room of the mansion, on a wall, watching the beekeeper figure out his story and try to survive, and watch the phantom damsel roam the castle where a monster lurks in the form of Dr. Schmela, the maybe mad scientist, leading the beekeeper towards his discovery. The show was approaching, and it must go on with a hitch, an interlude to this monotonous. I can return to the room and save him. He doesn't know what awaits. I'll follow him to the greenhouse, led by the doctor, and I'll peek inside with him so I can see the creation for myself. I already know what it is, and it haunts me. I only wish to show it to people so they can understand what it is, and then it will truly blossom as a wildflower into all the Elysian fields, into the wonderment of people's minds, so their souls have some comfort. He thought of Vishnu again, and his wish to savor things. A flower, always in bloom, and can never die, no matter the cold or heat or despair. These things only enhanced its beauty. He had seen its pattern in the gown of his muse, and he had taken it for its own like fire from Prometheus. The greenhouse was a box Pandora would be jealous of. He wanted to be that bee and roll around on the flower, collecting its dust. The beekeeper was going to die, and he had to save him, just like he had to save himself. The time to display his work was approaching. All of his friends would be there. He mustn't disappoint. The gallery would be dressed as his own Louvre. He was a real artist today. He counted each step along the way and then lost track. He would have to get back to this idea a bit later. He wanted to see Maris again. Why was she crying? But there were more important things at hand. His niece, Ava Margot, would be there, and so would Gray. And he could disappoint. He tried to collect his thoughts and catch his breath. This could not be the end. There was more story to tell, more twists and thorns and petals or petals, a soaring, triumphant resolution to the missing notes, a blazing divine shimmer of gospel inside that wretched room, which housed a thing he still couldn't define. And he had to see it for himself. It wasn't enough to just believe anymore. End of The Flower Maker, Part 1. Thank you, folks, for tuning in. And that's that with that. Appreciate y'all. We'll see you for Part 2.